deep dive of the week. um, it kind of goes hand in hand with customers at a retail store in person not knowing you're really being tracked, and then employees at a company of all sorts not really knowing you're tracked and how much I guess surveillance is really going on. So this one teleperformance I was tracked overseas. I think it was a UK company, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in Europe, which I would imagine the regulation would protect them a lot more. But what do you call? This one was I didn't really go through that one as much. I don't think. Did Brent or Roger? Did you see this teleperformance one as much?
I could just read off a bit of this here. Multinational call center used by dozens of leading UK companies has been criticized for what unions have called the intrusive monitoring of home working staff and their families. And their families. Just thought I'd point that out, as well as asking workers to hand over biometric and medical data. That paragraph alone is chilling when you think about what it just said. Not it's not enough just to get the employees and their family stuff. I mean, what's going on in the family and biometric and medical data? What the hell do they need all that for?
I mean, obviously to provide stellar customer support, right? The, yeah, the other one that was pretty funny was Amazon had one too, of course, about how they track it, and I think yeah, this motherboard article, another article on the same topic, I thought was probably one of the funnier headlines was Amazon will monitor workers' keystrokes to combat data theft, which is the irony of as they're not stealing your data because you have to opt into it, but who's the one really collecting the data and taking it at the end of the day? The employee who's working or the company who's doing the surveillance? Who's the real data thief at that point? And then Amazon has their stories about the drivers as well, cameras for them. Obviously, warehouse workers have a lot of difficulties and what do you call surveillance that happens inside those facilities. And so, I mean, ultimately, I guess there are, most people would say that your employer should trust you, and through that trust, someone's going to perform well. And if you have to resort to tracking mechanisms, probably not the best way to really, for long-term success of your own company is not the best way. But at the same time, it's also probably net net negative for you if your employees know that you're tracking you because you're just really not breeding employees, I guess, there. But what do you guys think? Have you seen more of these go on from other companies as well, or seen a trend? I guess an uptick, probably like Brent was saying with the pandemic, just more people working at home and feeling they need to be like surveilled essentially because companies won't trust them to work at home for some reason. Um, as if walking through the halls of an office in person was some kind of metric for productivity, but clearly people or bigger companies probably feel a certain type of way about this.
We have seen bunch of companies come up, pop up, and their businesses take off because there are a lot of companies looking for such surveillance tools, essentially to monitor so-called employee productivity. Right, that's an unfortunate trend. We're noticing it, and in fact, even I've seen one from Microsoft launch features where they say, "Hey, you can monitor your employees and whatnot." There was a pushback, and Microsoft had to pull back some of these things. But in general, when you talk about surveillance, we've been talking about consumer or a customer surveillance out there. Us as a customer, being tracked and whatnot. But there is not enough discussion happening for employee surveillance because an employer knows a lot about an individual, their personal data. When you join a company, they are doing let's say a background check and whatnot. So an employer knows about it. Then there are aspects like financial information, the payroll data and whatnot, maybe healthcare information, the benefits, your family information. So employer knows a lot about an employee. How are they really keeping that? That question is not being asked and discussed today. Is an employer making sure that the tools they use, the third party vendors they use, are keeping their employees information safe? I don't think a lot of companies are doing that at this point, number one. Number two, is the employee asking the employer on how their information is being kept. Today, I don't know if that is happening too. I think both has to happen. The employer has to be open with the employee, saying that this is how we are protecting your data, because these days that is the expectation. When a company takes privacy of an employee seriously, the respect for that company goes up. In other words, just like these days companies want to work for environmentally conscious companies, they also like to work for privacy conscious companies out there. And these two are related. When you say environmentally conscious, if you look at, you can safely say that something like pollution is a byproduct of, say, oil companies and all those companies, right? Just the same way, surveillance and privacy abuse, this is a byproduct of ad industry. They both are very related. And it is time to basically stop the privacy abuse as well as the nature abuse. And in both cases, just like people and employees want to work for, companies that are environmentally conscious, they want to work for companies that are privacy conscious. I think that is the trend we are seeing there. Increasingly, this will become true, and it will become a responsibility of the employers to make sure that all the employee information is secured and kept in check.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like rocket science because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you sign up for a service, you have to check the box for terms and conditions and privacy policy. When you are employed by some company, there should be mutual disclosure, essentially, of what is happening with my information, right? Especially when it comes to payroll, productivity, clicking, surveillance, monitoring, all these kinds of things. What is happening with that? And why isn't there a privacy policy for employees, basically, and for an employer-employee relationship? And disclosure that your data is collected in X, Y, and Z ways, and this is how we use it, and we don't share it or send it outside, whatever, right? I mean, just even I think smaller companies probably generally have like better intentions, but larger companies probably not so much. I think it's just kind of the evolution of how companies kind of evolve in size. One crazy thing that we came across was this, I guess, employee performance monitoring kind of segment, right? And so I guess if you start searching for it online, you'll get a couple different results because a lot of it will be about like employee performance in terms of like annual assessments and things like that. But these guys, is this the Work Pulse guys, right, Brent? I think. Yeah, these guys are wild. Like, I don't know if you can zoom in on that screenshot a little bit if anybody actually it pays attention, but it tells you basically like what apps people are currently using. On the screenshot, this person named Maria was using Facebook, and it like shows up in red that it's like unproductive employee, basically, which is just wild to me that like, checking a camera feed or whatever, that when you're active, making sure you're there is one thing, but this is complete level of like full monitoring. And I guess on one hand, I see the argument that employees should not expect any level of privacy on company issued devices, whether it's your company phone or your company laptop. Everything can be tracked. I would imagine under the guise of compliance or regulation or something along those lines. In certain industries, it might make more sense than others. But if you're a customer service rep, handling returns for some online store, do you really need to track all this kind of stuff, right? If the work is being done, the work is being done. But this stuff goes far really quickly, and you would have no idea that it's installed on your machine at all, right? Let alone on your phone, same way.
And the result of this is its impact on trust. And employees simply will not trust companies that are resorting it, because they are doing it because they don't trust their employees. And trust is not something you can measure, unfortunately, or fortunately. So, and I think that is where so people or employees will end up voting with their feet. They just move towards companies that respect people's privacy.
The trust thing is big because like oftentimes, like one of the bigger things I'll read, like if I go down like a Reddit rabbit hole sometimes and look at like people, I think personal finance subreddit or something where someone's like, company A is offering me this, company B is offering me this, should I move around or what should I do? And like granted, you take Reddit comments with like a massive grain of salt, maybe a chunk of salt or a block of salt, but everyone just seems like not happy with their employer. And I mean, everyone's obviously a stretch, but I'd say a good chunk of people who probably work don't really care much for their employer. And that's because that trust has probably been consistently broken through many actions that they've done over time, right? I guess this isn't really like a privacy thing, but privacy plays an aspect of it where, that lack of loyalty is what ultimately, that'll make someone jump from one company to another for an extra 2% raise or something like that, right? Even though you're restarting and things like that. Just because if the company shows no loyalty, no trust, no transparency, no goodwill to an employee, why should the employee ever return that favor, right? And I think privacy and strong regulations around trust is a good way a company can retain good talent. And they think that they're squeezing more out of people, probably because some management consultant from Big Four told them to. But that's not really how people generally react. And that like qualitative aspect of trust can't be metriced on a spreadsheet that's analyzed and put through some BI tool, essentially, right?
Exactly, and that's where the the culture and all of these come into play. Trust is and culture, they go hand in hand. Um, the I would say the culture of the company or the strength of the culture of a company is indirectly proportional to a company's attrition rate. You can look at a company's attrition rate and tell how good or how bad the culture of a company is. So if attrition is say 20%, 30%, unfortunately in some of the companies that is the case, you can tell that you don't have to look at any other stats. You can tell that there's no strong culture in there and there's no sense of trust in there. So those two are extremely related, and you can safely say that the ones that are monitoring at this level, that the ones that do not trust their employees well enough, you can safely say that the strength of the culture is going to be on the lower side. That said, regarding that article, there is always a context to it. In some cases, in some very specific cases, some of these make sense. Like if you are entering a bank vault, you should expect to be surveilled, and that is the expectation bidirectionally, right? If you are, let's say, if you are in a system that has access to all your key devices in a data center, and that is critical point to access some of the data, well, you expect that keystrokes to be tracked there. So the context is extremely important. Mm-hmm. But even in that case, there is a mutual understanding between the employee and the employer that it is going to be tracked, because you're going to see cameras all over, and you know that you're going to be tracked even when you're accessing sensitive information from a particular device. That communication and openness between an employer and employee is the key. In a lot of cases, what happens is the tracking and the surveillance happens, but the employee doesn't know about it. And that is what this is no different from what happens on the consumer side or the customer side. And we have been saying where people should know and they should be able to opt in. And even in an employee's case, that is true. Employees should know what they are getting into, and they can choose whether to get into it or not.
I'm just popping this up from my buddy Bob Fagel, and I'm sorry, there is an echo. I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but he has an interesting question. What are the laws and ethics of employee monitoring and privacy?
Take a guess.
Do companies have those? This is a very good question.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea either. Maybe we got to do some more researching and figuring it out. I would imagine there's got to be, I mean, I could almost bet that there's nothing on a federal level, and maybe some states are better than others, but that's probably the extent of what that's there. Maybe some countries are doing it better than others as well. But yeah, I think it's not at the end of the day, the people who are like Brent was saying about how big companies control a lot of government aspects. It's the companies that are employing the employees that control policy. So it's not like the employees have like a massive base of influence to say that we want some, laws and disclosures around these kinds of things, right? So it could be inherently, not really equal in that sense, but definitely something we'll try to dig into a little bit more and maybe talk about next week or the week after. But anything else on this kind of employee management, monitoring, tracking, surveillance?
I think what will likely happen is just like when an employee signs up to a company or joins a company, will likely have an agreement or openness about the privacy, and that's where we are headed. It's just that the companies that take this seriously and jump on it early on are the ones that will benefit from it. Then there is other aspect to it. Employees, when they request some data to the employer, an employer may say, "Hey, we protect your information." But there is also sad reality is employers' intention may be right, but it may not be out of their control. For example, an employer may trust, like in this case, like an ADP or Intuit Payroll, right? I'm sure there are a lot of companies that use these companies for the payroll information, but they likely don't know that their payroll information is being sold to someone else. And when they themselves don't have the visibility into this, how can they provide guarantee to the employees about it? That lack of visibility it will hurt all parties in this case. So, which means that is where the laws and all of those will come in, like the DPAs and that exist in the GDPR world will likely become common to make this a standard.